So, thank you everyone for joining today's Oregon Alliance for Educational Equity, first ever lobby day and our special luncheon on education equity. So as we go ahead, we've got an hour, and so for today we've got 4 to 5 specialists within the education system here in Oregon. And so what we're hoping that can happen today is to hear from them, what their jobs are in terms of education policy, but also what are some of the major initiatives that they're working on this particular legislative session that would help the students, and the kids that we directly work with throughout Oregon. So the way that we'd like this luncheon to work this afternoon is that we'd like each of you to take 5 minutes or so each to introduce yourselves, the office that you work with, kind of share with the group the major initiatives that you're working on this session, but also where do you think we could be a resource to you to move some of that work forward, and where do we play a role. That'll take about 20 minutes, and 20 to 25 minutes or so, and then we'll open the remaining about half an hour or so to questions that any of you have for these folks here today. So let's go right ahead and get started. Anyone feel ready to jump in and be first?
I'll go ahead and go first.
Okay.
We're going to try to do the
far end over
All
here.
right.
My name is Tony Anderson. I am the communications guy for the Early Learning Council within the Oregon Education Investment Board. I have to say, there's no place I'd rather be today. This is a great group of folks, and it's great meeting with all of you. And I also have to add that my girlfriend, my longtime partner, is Colombian. So if she knew that I was coming to this today and not speaking Spanish, there's probably going to be some hell to pay when I get home tonight. So apologize, you guys don't want to hear me speak Spanish. It sounds pretty bad. So I'm excited to be here and talk with you guys just because of the opportunity to interact. Early learning is a very complex and dynamic field, dynamic area when it comes to education policy. Most of what happens in early learning is not in the classroom. It's kids that are feeling healthy. It's kids that are interacting with their parents and their families as their first teacher. It's receiving quality child care. And then it's also just having the services and support of the community to be able to develop as a kid as you continue to grow. So it's all over the place in communities, and being able to really focus on the most vulnerable and the most at risk in our communities is really our focus with the Early Learning Council, and thinking about how to leverage that so that every child is born with the opportunity to succeed, and having that be able to transfer over in K through 12 school and in life and in work, and to have those positive experiences that everyone deserves from the time that you're born throughout your lifetime. So that's really sort of our high-level strategy and our high-level vision with the Early Learning Council. More specifically, some of the things we're doing, we're working to create what we're calling hubs, and we currently have a bill, House Bill 2013, that brings services to our communities, integrated services, kind of a one-stop shop, if you will, for early learning services for parents, families, and children in our communities throughout the state of Oregon. We're working with OEIB to develop an early English language learner strategic plan for early learners, so that you don't just have ELL services when a child enters kindergarten, but that they have, you guys, everyone in the state of Oregon has those services available prior to entering kindergarten, so that people can start out on the same foot. From a communications perspective, I'm really thinking about ways that we engage parents and families and communities so that we can really understand the cultural relevancy and the cultural nuances that exist, so that we can apply those to both our communications and our operations moving forward. Had a really interesting conversation with a family the other day, and they said, well, it was a very nice mother and father, and they said, well, they were from El Salvador, I believe, and they said, well, preschool is strange to us. Preschool is just this strange thing to us because, well, first of all, it gives us an unfair advantage over other families. Second, they said, this is our family. Our family is going to teach our children prior to entering. So So it really made me think, well, you know, of course, there's going to be different cultural approaches to this, and we really need to, as the Early Learning Council, as a governing body, we really need to take that into our strategy and our communications, and we need to work with people on that to better understand and then apply. So where I could really use your guys' help is just feedback, you know. What do you want to hear? What information do you need to know, and how we can better provide that as part of the Early Learning Council, as part of the state of Oregon for your guys' needs.
Move right along. So my name is Iris Bell, and I'm the director of the Youth Development Council, and you have these little maroon burgundy packets that I've passed out that kind of gives you the background and the framework for the council itself. It was established through the legislative process in House Bill 4165 to support the Oregon Education Investment Board in supporting academic achievement, reducing juvenile crime, and getting measurable outcomes and results for all students. So the council itself has a set of values and a set of visions that you can see in the document itself, but our work and the areas of work, and I think that's in one of your documents as well, that we've kind of taken a look at has to do with educational supports and developmental assets, prevention, intervention, employment and internship, and career development, state agencies. We're looking at all the state agencies in state government that serve youth. And one of our goals is to align and coordinate those services for the folks around the state in a way that has these agencies all supporting youth in some sort of, with respect to some continuity. Right now, there are different youth agencies doing things in state government, but they should be aligned and they should be talking to each other, and they should be helping to support communities in a way that's more supportive and respectful of what actually is happening in communities. We also are responsible for the juvenile justice programs that are in communities, and we also will be looking at data, research, and evaluation. So those are the areas, but who are the kids? Who are the young folks that we actually serve? We're charged with serving kids 6 to 20. That's the population range. And who are some of these kids? Well, in the 60s, they were called, not disengaged youth, they were called youth, left behind youth. And then in the 70s or so, they became idle youth. Then they became the disengaged youth. Then they became the disconnected youth. And now they're being called opportunity youth. And the federal government now has several programs, and you have folks around the country talking about a group of kids. Now, who are they to you? Some of these kids are the kids who have dropped out of school, who've been suspended from school. They are homeless youth. They are LGBT youth. They are gang youth. These are the populations of youth that we've been charged with helping to support, get back on track towards academic success or employment or career development. So that's our charge, to work with a population of youth right outside of this 0 to 6 group, and to begin to help support them and to invest in them. We're going to do that by making some targeted, focused investments in communities. Where you all have identified a need that we can help fill, that's what we're going to try and do throughout the state. We have limited funds, but we believe with a targeted, focused investment, we can make a difference in the lives of these young people and of these youth. And so that's going to be our aim, all towards this whole notion of academic success. So this is where we will be supporting the Oregon Education Investment Board and the Oregon Department of Education as it moves towards its broader long-term goals. We will come along and help support that through making the kinds of investments to youth and to families and to communities that can make the difference in the lives of these young folks, who very often get left out, very often don't get the funding, very often don't get the resources that they need to be successful. So that will be the charge and the responsibility of the Youth Development Council. Thank you.
Question?
Question now?
Hold on to it though.
Exactly.
Hola, soy Sara. Estoy trabajando con el Departamento de Educación aquí en CEA. Mi español es muy básico y yo voy a hablar en inglés, pero yo puedo entender más o menos si usted tiene una pregunta. So my name is Sarah Pope. I work for the Department of Education. I'm going to speak in English because my Spanish is really basic. But if you have a question in Spanish, I can pretty much understand it, so I want to make sure that I answer it. So I started working at the department 5 months ago, and I've been learning a lot about what the department does and what the department doesn't do. So some of the main areas of focus for the department is that we administer a statewide assessment, a couple of them. One of them is called OAKS, for the students in the room. Does anyone remember taking OAKS on a regular basis? The other one is called ELPA. So if your student is a Spanish-speaking student, you every year take an assessment called the ELPA. So one of the things the department does is administer that assessment. The other thing the department does is we get dollars from the federal government to administer programs like Title I programs focused in schools with high levels of poverty, Title II programs focused on educators, and we administer those programs, right? One of the things we're starting to do a lot more of, and what personally makes me really excited, is starting to help districts implement best practice. So instead of just doing an assessment, which is important, or just doing compliance with the federal dollars, also starting to link up our districts. So if there's a best practice going on in Woodburn or in Salem, they're connected to Beaverton, or they're connected down to Medford, right? So we're starting to do more of that work. I would say this legislative session, there's some really important opportunities for your advocacy, which is going to be really important and really necessary. The first is there's a bill, and I don't ever remember the names of bills. I think, is the network 3232? 3233. So 3233 is an important number. Everyone should write it down. Maybe I'll remember it. 3233 is a bill to create networks across Oregon to really help with best practice. And if we can get this bill through the legislature, what it would enable us to do at the department is for the first time create a team of people who are working on closing the achievement gap. So I want to give a little bit more context about why that matters so much. I mean, you all have the data here. You know, in terms of your kids' lives, how big the gap is between usually Asian American students and students of color are usually a year or more behind. And that we as a state need to do a lot better so we eliminate that gap. At the department, we have about, well, not the department, in the state, we have about 58,000 English language learners. So students who enter Oregon speaking a language other than English. We have 1.25 FTE, full-time employees, so less than 2 people, dedicated to improving educational outcomes for English language learners. That's not enough. If you have 58,000 students, you need more than 1.5 or less full-time employees dedicated to closing those gaps. We just hired David Bautista. Are any of you from Woodburn? Everybody? No. Woodburn? Parents? Woodburn? No. I know him. So David is going to come work at the department to help lead this office. We're hoping we can hire more staff to work with him, and that's part of what's in that bill 3233. Which is why it would be really important if you're interested in the department having a team to work alongside districts to close achievement gaps to help advocate for that bill. I think that's probably the most important bill that comes to mind right now in terms of where your advocacy is needed. But I was looking at your sheet that you were handing out to legislators. The other important piece of work we do is that we create the Oregon School and District Report Card. And so this isn't a child's report card, it's a report card that says, how is your child's school or how is your district doing? And I'm not sure if you've seen our current report card, but it's very confusing and doesn't give a lot of helpful information. And we're in the process of revising it and making it better. So it's going to be really important that if you, I see you have a recommendation around what you'd like to see in that report card. So when it comes time to adopting the new report card, which will be in the next 2 months, it'll be important that you take your advocacy both to the department and also to the public committee, Tony Hobson and Sandy House from Salem Kaiser, to make sure that they hear your voices about what you'd like to see in that report card. So I wanted to make sure you knew about that because it's happening right now. So those are the 2 opportunities I'd say where we really need your involvement, and I look forward to answering questions after Whitney talks about the Oregon Education Investment Board.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here and for inviting us to come and talk about what we do. I am Whitney Grubbs, and I am the policy advisor for Dr. Rudy Crew and the Oregon Education Investment Board. As many of you know from being part of this movement over the last few years, the Education Investment Board is a group of folks chaired by Governor Kitzhaber, who are really charged with looking at education for all ages of kids across the whole spectrum, from our youngest Oregonians all the way up through graduate school and other post-secondary opportunities. So the Oregon Education Investment Board has been spending the last year really looking closely at what are some of the investments the state could make with its dollars in points along a child's learning pathway in order to really ensure that we're getting some progress for our students, that we're really getting progress on closing the achievement gap, that we're getting progress on improving our graduation rate, that we're getting progress on having more of our young students enter kindergarten ready to learn, and that we're having more of our third graders reading at grade level. And so what I've passed around, I did not bring it up, I wasn't sure if it's the number of you, but there are some handouts that describe 4 different strategic investments that we are pushing the legislature to make, and they're really important, and I think each of them is very relevant to the advocacy that you're doing here today. So Sarah mentioned the first one. It's an investment in teachers. It's House Bill 3233. It would really allow us to put some support and best practices and training for teachers around things like how to serve English language learners, how to serve students with special needs, how to be much more culturally inclusive, how to, it's also, there's a plan for creating a statewide plan to improve the number of educators of color in the state. Obviously we have a student population that's very diverse and an educator population that does not look like the student population. So we really want to create some plans to create some pathways for recruiting students of color to be teachers, for supporting them in thinking about teaching as a profession, and really bolstering the number of people that we have who are of color that are in the teaching profession. So that bill does a lot of things that I think are crucial investments for closing the achievement gap. We all know our teachers are, other than parents, our teachers are the most important element in our students' education, and we really need to commit to improving how they're approaching their practice. The other investments that we're talking about are contained in a bill called House Bill 3232, and these are 3 really important investments. The first investment is an investment in early literacy or early reading. This would work, much of it would be administered as a grant kind of program that different community-based organizations, school districts, early learning centers could apply for these grants. And the purpose of the early learning program is really to ensure that parents and families have strategies for getting their kids ready to read. They have access to books, access to libraries, access to support around how to work with your young children on the literacy skills they need, the number and letter skills that they should have when they come to kindergarten. Programs like Eduardo's program is a great example of what this is meant to fund. So I think it's really important for your voice to be heard around both what works in your community and what you want to see more of in the state. The other one is called Post-Secondary Aspirations, which really is a sort of lofty name for supporting students in the middle and early high school grades to make sure they're on track. And when they're not on track, we want to be able to offer them the guidance and support and offer their families the information they need to be able to get on track for graduation and to see every student in the state think of themselves as able to go to college. So there's some money for scholarships in that initiative and some money for early college credit, so for high school students to get college credit while they're still in high school, which is a really important element, I think, to ensuring that college is affordable. And the last one is an investment in STEM. which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. In our state, the economy is, as you know, really heavily contingent on being able to have a workforce that can fill the jobs that are here in Oregon. And a lot of the industry in Oregon is around science and technology and engineering. We need to have our students be able to have experienced those kinds of activities and those kinds of curriculums so that they can really be prepared to enter the workforce. We also think that those are the kind of activities and curriculum that interest kids. Doing hands-on experiments, working in the community, internships, other kinds of things that use their hands and their minds, and have them working in groups and not just, you know, focused on the books. And so those are the initiatives that we're moving forward. We would love your support and have been working closely with the Alliance around keeping you informed and keeping you aware of different opportunities to come and voice your support. And so I want to thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry, I had one more thing I want to mention. One more thing. This is really important, and I'm hoping that everyone in this room will be able to give some feedback. And this is on the Oregon Education Investment Board is developing an equity lens. And this will be a document that guides the vision for how the governor operates, for how all of the agencies operate, for how we do business in the state in a way that is constantly examining the impact that our actions have on students of color and students in poverty and students whose first language is not English. I think it's a really important thing. I would love to share it with you and have you give feedback on it.
We're translating it as we speak. We've been translating it, but we want to put it out there and send it to all of them.
Yes, yes, it's wonderful, and it's really exciting because I think the governor is really committed to this work. And I think for the first time in the state, we have the highest level of leadership understanding the importance of equity, and so I credit you all and your voices with really bringing us to the top level.
Can be. I give no.
Sort of covered it.
You got it? Good.
Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, we're now opening it up to Q&A from anyone who has a question. First you, then yes. You first.
All this work that you're committed to, I think, is just fantastic, necessary, crucial to the health of the state. But I'm confused, how concerned are you and how important is it to you in the work that you do daily and that you're planning for the future to think about the large numbers of kids in our schools who really don't see a bright future because of their legal status? Students are all the work in the world that you do is not going to affect their education, their lives. If you're in the 7th grade, you just came through grade school, had a great school experience, you get to mid school, and you start to realize, well, I could work really hard and be a really good student and get really good grades, but I'm not going to go to college anyway. One, I can't afford it. And not only that, but when I graduate, all those good grades and all that achievement, I may be able to work at McDonald's, and I won't even be able to have a driver's license to drive to my job. How important is that to you all, that particular demographic, in the work that you're doing and in your strategizing?
I can answer at least from the governor's perspective and from Dr. Cruz's perspective. That's incredibly important. And we were thrilled this session that the governor came out in support of tuition equity and that he's also supporting the driver's license work. And I think it's really, really important. Part of the strategy in one of the investments I was talking about is also about building that kind of a a pathway and really working with students and their families of all kinds, including undocumented students, around how to access college and how to really create a culture that encourages all students to think about college as a possibility for them. Obviously, the fiscal strain that we're under makes it difficult to increase investment to the levels that we want, but the governor's long-term plan is really to begin to build that investment so that all kids would be able to have a promise of an affordable college education regardless of where they come from. So you're absolutely right, it's crucial because it's a student, we all know it's a student's motivation and it's their understanding of themselves as being able to access college that really drives them through. And a lot of the kids who drop out in high school and middle school, it's because there is no promise at the end of the road for them. There's nothing to keep them, pull them through that pipeline and keep them going. So I think it's a crucial piece, and we're working, I think, pretty diligently on moving the legislature and others along to thinking about it in that way.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add except that the tuition equity bill I think is a good, huge first step for Oregon, and I've had the privilege of being able to track that bill this legislative session, and the biggest obstacle was clearing the House, which it already did. The Senate has tried and passed this tuition equity. It's like the DREAM Act, but the Oregon version. Has tried successfully to get it out of the Senate, but it never got out of the House. So it's now moving over to the Senate, and it looks like it's going to pass in large part because we have the support of folks, Democrats, Republicans, the governor, so that's a really big first step. I'd say the second thing is being really thoughtful about how students, when they're in high school, can start accumulating college credit before they even graduate. So that you can graduate, you can enter a community college a semester ahead, a year ahead. And community college, it doesn't matter what your citizenship is, right? And so we have a couple years to start making more and more dense in making college even more and more accessible. But I'd say the tuition equity bill is a really important first step. And then we're going to be right back in there trying to make sure that we expand so that kids have access.
And I would just add to that I think that we are poised because you have the leadership now. I mean, we finally have leadership, as Sarah was saying, that recognizes these needs. And as a result of that, you're seeing these types of bills come forward, which will need your advocacy and support. But this is a long time in coming. I mean, this has been something that I think folks in communities have asked for or sought for a very, very long time. And finally, we're getting some of these needs addressed. And so I think to take a look at the leadership that we have today around this is very important, and to acknowledge that leadership and to support that leadership as they move forward. Because for some of these folks, this is difficult to do in their communities, but they're stepping forward and they're doing it, so they should have your support as they move forward as well.
So, your question?
Yeah.
I just thinking about for Title I students. How we can able to make sure the money for the students and doesn't go into the general fund? Because the achievement gap is always come because there's not enough funds to support the student needs. And also, if the bill 2233 didn't pass, how we can able to convince the teachers they're doing a marvelous job, but they also need to retrain because their education, their background was 20, 25, 30 years ago when the society was a little different. And now we need more kind of into the technology instead of mill work. And this is why my biggest concern, the achievement gap can be accomplished as long as we can put the money where it's needed.
So that's a fantastic question, and thank you so much for asking it. In response to the first piece of your question, which is about the ensuring that the money that is designated for students in poverty makes it to services for students in poverty, is in some ways somewhat tricky because in Oregon, school boards really make the decisions about how the money is used. used. But what the OEIB is really committed to doing is making very public through the Achievement Compact where you are in terms of outcomes for those students. And for places where they're not getting as good of outcomes, where they have a big achievement gap and where they're not seeing good gains and good results for students in poverty, it's going to be the job of Dr. Crew and the Oregon Education Investment Board to come to them and say, you're not getting the job done with the money that we're providing you. What is your plan to change practice and improve outcomes? So it's sort of an indirect way of ensuring that those resources are spent on the right things. But I think that because of the commitment from Dr. Crew and because of the courage that he's bringing to Oregon to really come to superintendents and say, tell me what your decisions are and tell me why you're not getting good outcomes for your kids, I think we're going to be able to really put some pressure on school boards and school districts to make the right kind of decisions for kids.
The only thing I'd add about Title I is that it is actually the funding stream where we have more control over it than a lot of the other funding streams. When I said that we have some staff who do compliance, there's a lot of checklists about where you can spend those Title I dollars and where you can't. And we do regularly monitor districts to see if they're spending it in the right places. On the educator effectiveness, the network, the Bill 32, 33, I really think we need it as a state. I think it would be like taking your vitamin. We'd be able to like move through and advance so much work so much faster. If we don't get it, I know that Dr. Crew and Rob and the governor are really committed, and all these other agencies are really committed to making sure the work moves forward. But I think it's going to make sure it will enable us to move the work forward a lot faster. So the commitment won't go away. The resources, it will be harder.
Can I answer?
So we've got your question there, and then you?
And then high school, you have a question too.
Yeah, that's right.
Good question. I can ask that later.
You want to?
It's just a question about if she knows somebody or not. I'm trying to figure it out.
So you then, go ahead.
Lo voy a hacer en español y ella me ayudará a traducirla. Dice que van a hacer mucho más para los jóvenes en ciencias y en tecnología, que va a haber más inversión, recursos para eso.
You've mentioned that there will be resources for STEM careers.
Pero ¿qué va a pasar con los jóvenes que no están preparados con las habilidades necesarias para todo?
But what's going to happen with all the children or youth that are not prepared for STEM careers and they're behind?
Great question, thank you. And so the initiative that we're putting forward, both the network for supporting teachers, one of the pieces of work there will be around ensuring that teachers have the ability to teach some of these subject areas. Because like as this gentleman mentioned, for many teachers, the work of teaching is an evolving thing, and we need to be teaching the teachers and having the teachers learn just as much as we need to be having students learn. So that's a piece of it. We need to really make sure our educators can teach students what they need to know from the various earliest grades about that. I will also say that in the initiative, part of the funding is targeted toward ensuring that underserved students are getting access to the kinds of STEM programs and foundations that we think are important. So things like after-school programming and robotics and some of the different kind of science club activities and things all the way from elementary grades that our kids, all kids, have access to those kind of things so that they do have a strong foundation and aren't behind when it comes to high school biology or more advanced levels of science. So you're right, it's got to start from the young children, and we have to make sure that it's all scaffolded all the way up to a career.
Can I add real quick? And I would just add that, that can be through the smallest little things. That can be in the home, that can be doing, little projects with your kids. That can be coming up with creative ideas to get children engaged in just sort of the beauty of science and engineering and just the things that can be created, and doing that at an early age, the earliest age possible, is really going to carry over, I think, into the rest of their lives. I know it did for me as a kid, and I think it's pretty, pretty similar for others.
So let me give you an example of that. The Youth Development Council just recently partnered with the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife and put together a program over in North Portland called Salmon in the Classroom. So you had little 3rd graders and 4th graders, they released eggs into a tank right there in the classroom, and they were able to chart those salmon through their hatching. And they just recently, I don't know if this was on OPB this morning, so we sat down with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and we said there ought to be science and STEM kinds of activities going on right now in classrooms. And so the Department of Fish and Wildlife is going to expand that. They already do it in some communities, but they weren't doing it in the communities that we felt they should be doing it in. And so we partnered with them. And they actually released the salmon this morning and are going to track that whole process. Several kids got so excited. They were calling themselves scientists. They were saying that they, seriously, in the classroom, they were already saying, oh, I want to go into biology. These are 3rd graders. These are 3rd graders saying, I want to go into biology. So the fact that there are those kinds of resources that can be brought into the classroom right now are the things that we ought to be doing. And we ought to be partnering. The Fish and Wildlife Service at the federal level is throughout this state. And we are not making the kinds of contacts with them that say, why can't the State Department of Fish and Wildlife and the federal department partner with schools to get those kinds of programs into classrooms? That can happen.
I have a community question. Some of us have been advocating for the meaningful involvement of the non-profit community organizations throughout the state. We in the Alliance have around 25 community organizations, and we know there are several other organizations that are supporters of the Alliance that have been doing the grinding. Right here we have like 6 of our Latino organizations that they are doing a lot of volunteering work, but they want to do more in a more structured way. We know that there are some community initiatives to involve the non-profits, the community organizations for the most affected. How do they go about it? Or can you relate to us what is the process, or if there is a process, and what are the opportunities?
So I'll speak to that, Eduardo, and you and I have had some conversations about it. The process is still evolving because we haven't passed the bills, so the legislature is still considering whether or not they agree that these programs are good programs. We think they will agree with us, and then what we'll be doing is sending information out through our community networks about the opportunities that are going to be coming through these different programs. So like I said, with the early literacy program, there'll be opportunities for community organizations that have a solid plan about how they're going to engage their families and their community and improve reading outcomes for their kids. There'll be opportunities through the STEM initiative to show, for different organizations to show how they might bring a culturally relevant and significant STEM program into their community, so that the information will be forthcoming. And our hope is that the equity lens that I talked about before will really drive our selection of where the money goes, so that we're really looking at how we can close achievement gaps, how we can ensure there's equity in the state. And when we're figuring out how to distribute this money through these grants, we're thinking about it through an equity lens. So the process will probably happen over the course of the summer. Hope that some money will begin going out right in the fall to be able to support activities next year.
Would there be any programs to help these community organizations with their professional development to be able to qualify for those outcome-based programs?
I'm hoping that through our work with the department and through the OEIB staff itself, we'll be able to provide more support for organizations, so that it's not, so that organizations that might not have a track record in writing a grant or know how to really put together the outcome data will have support. So yes.
The only thing I would add is we have lots of various work groups that happen all the time at the department. Mary's been really helpful in getting a new one going on disproportionate discipline. And so when there's opportunities like that, it's great to have representation from across the state from different constituencies. So, just let me know who to send stuff to as these work groups are getting going. And if you raise your hand and say, I'm really passionate about this, I have this experience, I'd like to be part of it, to try to plug you into the right group.
So the woman in the white sweater, then Anger, and then Cecilia.
As we start to think about the possibility of more Latino students coming to the university, how can we ensure that once they arrive to higher ed institutions, they are going to receive the support that is going to guarantee that they will graduate? I am a faculty member at OSU, and you might know of our horrible graduation rate for Latinos. So we have students that finally reach college, and then on the first year that they are students at our institution, they stop studying, and now they are without a college degree and $30,000 in debt or more. So how can we ensure that we are going to have the people that look like them, the people who don't look like them but understand their needs, other resources?
Well, so I think it's multi-pronged, right? I mean, there's no one answer, but one of the things we're really focused on is ensuring that in high school when students are graduating, they're graduating college and career ready. So we're not graduating, we're making sure that when students enter the university or community college, they don't need remediation, where you spend down your FAFSA dollars, right, but don't get any credit. So I think that's really on us at the department to ensure that we've set the right bar and that we're systematically supporting both individual students, but also schools and teachers to get students to, when they graduate, they're actually ready for college and career. There's another part when it becomes the community college and higher ed, where we need to get much sharper around what resources are available for students upon entering. There's a lot of research, right, that shows you need to be academically ready, but you also need to have to manage your time well, you need to be able to persevere, you need to know how to ask the right questions in class. I mean, you need to be show some kind of grit when things get tough. And I think our system needs to get a lot better at figuring out how do you teach these skills. And I would look to you if you have ideas at the university level. And I know we're spending a lot of time thinking about it. My lens is really focused on the department right now, but it's a huge issue.
But I also heard another question there that has to do with racism on these college campuses and what happens from that perspective. You can be ready, you can have the grades, you can have the ability, you can have all the rest of that, and you can run into professors and other students who know nothing about your culture and who absolutely detract from you being able to get that college diploma. So I think there's another issue that has to be raised. We've got to talk about it. We've got to talk about what's going on college campuses in this state when it comes to kids of color.
And right now, because we are focusing on efforts on tuition equity, and we are going to have this wave, and hopefully, this wave of students that are going to come knocking at our doors, and we are not ready.
Who are receptive and who are there to help them, because I know that from personal experience. My folks, my niece who went to the University of Oregon left and went to Fisk because of what happened there. There's just no receptivity for kids of color on those campuses, and we've got to change that. That has to be changed from what higher ed sees and the higher ed lens, just as it has to be changed in early education as well. So you talk about a P20 system, we're talking about a real P20 system that doesn't have kids who are capable of going to college, who have the capacity to finish, run into barriers that are not their fault, that are still in place, that have to do with age-old discrimination and racism.
So some of the efforts I'll add too, because that we don't have a representative from higher ed here, but because OEIB is charged with overseeing the whole system, I'll just add that for the first time last year, the universities and the community colleges also entered into achievement compacts. And this was really, they don't have the same kind of accountability. We've never had accountability for requiring them to look at their disaggregated data the same way that K-12 has. And so really the Achievement Compact was the first time. And the idea behind it is that when we see a place, a community college or a university in Oregon that's doing extremely well with students of color or extremely well with English language learners, we can go there and we can figure out what kind of student success initiatives they have in place, and we can scale those up. Also, I'll add that 3233, the Educator Network Bill, includes community college faculty as one of the groups that we intend to serve with that. So when we're talking about training teachers, we're including faculty in the idea of how you would ensure that people have the skills they need to serve students. So it doesn't end at, it doesn't end at 12th grade. You're exactly right. When students are in college, the teachers also need to have the skills to be able to teach, and the cultural competence and the understanding of equity to be able to really reach those students.
So we've got about 10 minutes left just as a time check. So I'm going to go Inger, Cecilia, then Mark.
I'll pass.
All right, Cecilia.
Question, for the Organization Investment Board, what's the percentage of people of color sit in the board making those decisions, making sure that the money is being distributed to all of the children in the state of Oregon?
Right. 3 of 12 or 4? 30%, 33%. 4 out of 12. I think it's fairly good, but there's never enough voices. I mean, I think we always encourage people to come and to testify and to bring their voices and to talk to us at all times so that we really can hear from people. Because no matter how you make up a board, it doesn't represent everyone. But I think we've been fairly diligent about ensuring that the board has a good cross-section of folks.
My last question. How is the board going to support bilingual bicultural teachers? There's a lot of funding that is being cut, and some of assistant teachers are being laid off. Some of these teachers are being laid off. First ones to lay off. There are some school districts or schools that we have 80% Latinos. I'm talking the Portugal school districts, 70 plus Latinos. We don't have representation at the school district. It is sad to see that. And I know that even with the budget that the governor is putting, they're not going to cut some of those, they're not going to cut, but even with that, there's no funds to keep those teachers. Some of them in Hillsborough School District and Portland School District will be losing their jobs. So what is the board or the council doing about that?
So I'll talk a little bit about the funding problem, and then I'll let Sarah talk a little bit about the plans with respect to dual language in particular, and the English language learner best practice models. So there's no doubt that there is a funding crisis in Oregon. We've been experiencing that for a long time, and the governor's strategy overall is to really do everything he can to increase the amount of money the state has to put in education. So when you hear about him working on healthcare savings, when you hear about him working on reforming the prison system, the purpose of those reforms is to increase the amount of money that we have to invest in education so that we can stop this slide and stop these cuts that we've been experiencing year after year. But I will also say that one of the issues, again, as I mentioned before, in this state, the money that goes into the state school fund and goes out to districts, this is the vast majority of the money in the state, it's the district boards who are responsible for choosing where to spend that money. So they are the entity that's looking at, do we cut the teacher assistant, or do we cut the, this program, or do we do this? They are making those decisions at the local level. So the idea of these strategic investments, one idea is we believe that some districts are making good decisions, others are making decisions that are not as good. And so we want to pull some of the money out of the school fund and strategically invest it in the things we know work. And some of the things that we know work are just the things that you mentioned. And so we want to be able to show those districts that are not making very good choices with their own money, hey, look at this. When we strategically invested money in this dual language program, look at what it did for kids. Why are you choosing to invest your money differently? So in a way, it's developing a state system where we are kind of shining the light on how districts are approaching things, so that A, we can teach them and support them, because many places just they might not know about a particular practice, but B, that we can also encourage and push a little bit harder than we've done in the past for them to make the right kind of choices with their money. But it's a big disconnect. The state provides the money, but the districts really make almost all the choices about how to spend it.
But doesn't the Education Board of Council have a structure? Shouldn't be structured at the state level to make it accountable to the leaders that are teaching our children?
So this is a question I ask myself all the time. So we have a lot of local control in Oregon. So as we're figuring out how do you get more bilingual, bicultural educators into the profession, how do you work with Western Oregon and University of Oregon and OSU, what happens once the teacher is hired is then a contract decision by the local school district. And you have some districts in Oregon that have protected their bilingual, bicultural educators even when they're brand new, even during budget cuts. And you have other districts that in negotiations haven't. And that it really is district by district by district. Now, what we can do in terms of the authority that we have between the department and OEIB, exactly what Whitney said, say, wait a minute, Woodburn is getting far better results than this district over here that just let go of all their bilingual, bicultural educators. We're going to hold up Woodburn as a really good example of how to close the achievement gap. And we're going to expect that when you're making your decisions, whether they be in contract negotiations or deciding what to spend your money on, you know we're watching and the outcomes have to look really, really good for our ELL students and students of color. That's the sort of authority and kind of the, where we can use the bully pulpit. But in terms of local control, we do not have the authority to tell a district this is who you can lay off or who you can't lay off. And we can talk more about that afterwards, but it is it's an interesting dynamic in Oregon where you have the state giving out the money and the local districts deciding how to spend it and who to hire and who to lay off. It's a challenge.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Mark?
Okay, I have 3 brief questions. To Whitney, with Bill 3233, is there a place for the Minority Teacher Act?
Yes, the bill specifically references the Minority Teacher Act as one of the programs that we want to support through that funding.
Sarah, the Discipline Subcommittee, I was talking with Mary earlier. I would recommend that there be a black male presence on that committee. I'm willing to help leverage that. We have a conversation after. And then Iris, is there opportunity for community-based organizations to have youth on the council? I'm looking at your council. I spoke with Ben Cannon when he first came to Portland with the governor to Paul. We talked about having students of color, youth be a part of that council, and we kind of circle back around that opportunity.
There are 4 youth on the council right now. There are 4 youth on the council.
Community-based organizations from in the community?
From the community.
Okay. We'll talk further.
Thank you.
Those are fast. Jason, Krista came in, and I just want at least her to have the opportunity to introduce herself and say what she is, what she does.
Thank you. I apologize. I was held late in another meeting. My name is Krista Rood. I'm the Head Start Collaboration Director for the state of Oregon, and I'm privileged to work in the early learning system, and I'm sure that my colleague was able to give you a high flyover of many of the initiatives that we're working on. But in all of them, the thing that the early learning system cares about most is ensuring that children are ready for kindergarten, and that really takes involvement of care providers, and first parents, right? Parents as the first teachers of their children, and that we really support all of the programs and initiatives that we're doing, and incorporating voices from the community in the actions that we take. And I know that there's a strategic plan that's being worked on with the Department of Education around ensuring that first, second language learners, that we're incorporating all of the appropriate and supportive elements to make sure that we're really connecting as many people as we can to make sure it's very representative as our initiatives need to be. So thank you for the chance to be here and to hear your concerns and your thoughts.
I had a question in regards to like technology in like pre-K kindergarten. Like I have a daughter, she's 3 years old, and like I've noticed that like with tablets, you know, that's an emerging technology. Is there like, are you guys like, is there any like thought of doing that? You know, maybe to expand kids, you know, scope of what they understand technology as? Just a question.
No, I don't know about at the early childhood level. At the K-12 level, we do have some pilots. Right now, they're mostly in pilot stages, where you have some districts who have issued tablets to elementary school students and then train the teachers on how to incorporate it into their teaching practices. Do you want to answer at the early childhood level?
Yeah, at the early childhood level, I think it's kind of a beginning stage. There's some research that talks about when is the most appropriate time to introduce this kind of technology to young children, and how are they seeing it and how do they perceive it. But I think that one of the things that I've been in several meetings, especially around using iPads or this kind of technology, where we've talked about not just how do we use that in terms of children, but even with parents. I mean, parents are busy people, and so in terms of supporting them with ideas for raising children, or providers who are in homes and spending a lot of time with kids from early in the morning until late at night. So we are thinking about technology in new ways. I would say it's probably, we're on the verge of new ideas with that, but I thank you for asking the question, because it helps me think about it more and bring that subject up in other conversations that we have.
It needs to be done right? I mean,
we
want to be really careful with this not becoming the scenario of just plopping your kid in front of the television. We want to use technology strategically, and it goes back to your point about STEM. I'm sorry, your comment about STEM. So, I mean, it's a tool, and it's something that I think we will continue to develop as a learning tool, as long as you know, as long as it fits into the curriculum, and as long as it's something that's going to help a child develop and not just entertaining.
I just want to say thank you. A lot of the bills that have passed in the 2011 or 2012 session that I really think got our state on track to improve education were because of advocacy. And so I know it can be tireless and it's hard to get here, and legislators reschedule meetings all the time, but it really, really, really does matter. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're at 1 o'clock, so panelists, thank you so much for joining us.